to share ideas in the face of our many sectoral challenges. These include COVID, Brexit, climate change, and ultimately our nation's competitiveness as an ag-food nation. By the end of today, I hope some of you find these challenges as opportunities also. In this webinar, we wanted to help our members understand the backdrop for Agri-Tech in both applications, case studies, and co-funding. Did you know that Ireland itself is the second largest exporter of IT services in the world, accounting for 50 billion of annual exports? So what is AgTech? AgTech describes innovative, science-based technologies in the agri-sector that enhance social, economic, and environmental sustainability. McKinsey International stated in 2017 that agriculture is the least digitized industry in the world with the most potential. And as the Silicon Valley of Europe here in Ireland, this has to be an opportunity. We are delighted to co-host this event with TSSG in Waterford, which is a gateway for industry to engage with researchers to leverage the best in science and technology. We have split the meeting into two parts. The first part deals with the overview of the sector, and the second part deals in more detail on the co-funding of collaborative opportunities. Our panelists today are bringing together the best minds in AgTech business, research, and agricultural science to help us understand how to create the partnerships of the future. We're delighted to have Dr. Karina Pierce to facilitate our first panel. Karina is no stranger to ASA. She is well known in research and education through the UCD School of Agriculture and Food Science. During her time, she's also served as ASA President and completed an Nuffield Scholarship, while also contributing 5 years on the Teagasc Authority. She has just started a new position as Senior Development Advisor in the Food Division at Enterprise Ireland, and we wish her well with that also. So over to you, Karina.
Thank you, Seamus, for the introduction, and also to you and the ASA for inviting me to chair the session this morning. As you have said, this morning's session is focused on AgTech and, the title of Understanding the Opportunities that Exist in this Area. And I think it's really timely, as we know that in Ireland and across the world, agriculture is becoming increasingly technologically advanced. And technology promises many things. It promises improvements in productivity and quality, increased efficiencies, reduced wastage, the ability for industry and for farmers to make better decisions, and ultimately, therefore, to improve sustainability. So all of these together should yield better economic returns on farm, in the wider ag industry, and as a consequence then in our rural communities. So this morning, I hope that we can learn a little bit more about this area and a little bit more about the terminology, because there are many different terms included in this. So we'll try and decipher some of those this morning. How we in Ireland compare internationally, the farmer perceptions and uptake of agri-technology, and also the opportunities that exist for you, for industry, to get involved in this exciting area. So I'm delighted to welcome our three speakers this morning, Patrick Barrett, Ethan Cleary and Kevin Doolin, and I'll introduce them a little bit more as we progress through the session. Each of the speakers are going to give a brief presentation, and I've warned them no more than 10 minutes. And then there may be a quick question or two if you're sending in questions before then we move on to the next speaker. But hopefully at the end we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A session. And so please send in any questions that you have, and I'll be happy to put them to the panel. So without further ado then, I'm going to pass on to Patrick Barrett, who will set the national and the international scene for us. So Patrick works in the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. He focuses on the bio and circular economy, on CAP ACUS, which is the Agricultural Knowledge and Innovation System, and on agri-digitization. So we're delighted to have Patrick to kick off for us this morning. So you can come in, Patrick, now, and I will pass over to you and come back to you at the end of your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just need to be able to find my slides. So can I just confirm with you, Karina, that everything is viewable?
Perfect, Patrick. Yep.
Okay, thanks a million. Okay, so good morning, everyone, and I hope you're all keeping well. So for me to kick off, I really think it's important that we all try and get our heads around actually what we think or consider agri-digitalization is. And we know there's increased amount of agri-data being generated, and we know there's advances in processing and artificial intelligence. And we're really trying to transition the agri-food and bio-based sector by connecting to this data, digitizing it, processing it, and then to be able to react and use it as a decision support tool. And we know that for this to happen, there needs to be increased governance and strategic development, addressing of key challenges and addressing of skills and jobs development and a whole range of issues. This is important for all the policymakers, Department of Agriculture, and our agencies, and also for the primary producers and actors all across the chain. The big things we have to deal with are natural capital, productivity and sustainability in agriculture, and really the physical, biological and technological and innovation development all across the sector. And agri-food tech is a broad church, as we can see here in this diagram, and digitalization must fit in amongst all of that. So what I want to cover today really is speaking a little bit about the knowledge base that's required, the uptake of technologies that I know, for example, Ethan will go into a little bit more detail on, the enabling environment that we need to put in place, and also the importance of the context for introduction of technologies. So Ireland has quite a considerable amount of activity already in place on digitalization. We know that we have strategically in either agri-food research and innovation agendas or the broad science, technology and innovation agenda for Ireland picked up on agri-digitalization. And this has meant quite a significant investment in infrastructure, either through Enterprise Ireland, Science Foundation Ireland, or the Department of Agriculture, in the human capacity around agri-digitalization and in infrastructure, either in, for example, Vista Milk or the Consus project, or either in the sort of digital innovation hubs that have been put in place through Nova UCD or PACE by TSSG or the Agri-Tech Centre of Excellence in Tralee. All of these are infrastructure to help us. But we've seen significant investment on the finance side. The NTMA and ISAF aligning with Finisterre Ventures, or Enterprise Ireland AIB aligning with the Yield Lab. We see activities by Alltech and Thrive with John Hartnett, the Irishman, playing a deep role in agri-digitalization in the Silicon Valley. So it's quite significant investment going on. We also see that strategically there has been a declaration by 24 European countries to how to develop a digital future in agriculture in the rural areas. And this picks up on key challenges, what technologies need to be advanced, what adoption needs to be considered either in terms of skills or how it's picked up at the farm level, and how this deployment is facilitated either through CAP or through EU research and innovation funding. And we know in between that there needs to be infrastructure put in place, either in terms of hubs or in terms of knowledge and innovation or in terms of large-scale pilots. And all of this is underway. And I think it would be useful if everyone maybe had a look at some of these documents to try and get the sense of where we're going with this system. In terms of CAP, it's also going to play its role. And we can see in the development of the Agricultural Knowledge and Innovation System, the so-called ACIS, that the development of digital technologies is a part of this. So what we want to do is try to capitalize on the potential of digitalization across all the 9 CAP objectives. And the fundamental ideas or challenges that need to be addressed are really around data usage, the commercial success, technology uptake, and the social development. And what the need is for the Department of Agriculture is to be able to describe a strategic outlook and how technologies will be uptaken in the areas of agriculture and the rural economy. So where are we now with, say, EU-funded opportunities that have been put in place already to deal with some of the issues? Well, we know that the Horizon 2020 system has invested at least 163 million in the areas of robotics, precision agriculture. There'll be discussions this morning on how cascade funding has been put in place through Smart Agri Hubs, but also other projects like AgRobo Food and Demeter. We also see that Teagasc is leading on a project where farm advisory services will be looking at how they can integrate with digital technologies and explain further to the farmer. And we know that the funding system in the future will not only develop the knowledge base, but it will also look to scale up and pilot and demonstrate activities. And the Digital Europe programme with a 9.2 billion fund will be very important in this area. We know there are key considerations around governance, data sharing and business models. We know that the Copa Cogeca has worked very hard with a range of different stakeholders to put in place a code of conduct. And we know that if we don't address these significant social issues, that it will hamper agri-digitalization uptake. So I think it's very clear that when we're developing technology, we need to have a clear eye on the non-technological issues associated with agri-digitalization, so that we don't come unstuck along the way with not dealing with some of the social issues that may be associated. So what the Department of Agriculture is involved in, and this will involve stakeholders such as Science Foundation Ireland and Enterprise Ireland, the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation, and other actors across and of course Teagasc across the system, will be trying to align EU policy with strategic actions that will happen nationally, be it the CAP strategic plan or ACAS development or the national digital strategy, with a whole range of agri measures. Some are in place already around the digital innovation hubs, as mentioned. Some are in public-private partnerships where already we have key academic and research organisations in tandem with industries such as Vista Milk or BioOrbic or the Consus project. But we also see the need now to understand that there's a lot of different types of technology in play. How can we combine these all together to deliver a service for the farmer that's usable, that's user-friendly, and that makes a difference in terms of productivity and sustainability? We also know that from the Department of Agriculture's point of view, e-governance, for example, the LIPUS upgrade or use of data that the department has or generates, and how this can be better used. And how can we develop knowledge transfer or farm advisory or even EIP agri-operational groups to develop on digitalization? And then the broader system. Obviously, broadband needs to be addressed, but regional strategies need to take into account, well, what will different agricultural and rural areas need in the different parts of Ireland where there's different types of activities being undertaken. Education, training and skills will be important, access to finance, entrepreneurship. And this involves partners beyond DAFM on the public side and obviously the private partnership. So there's five main things that we would like to discuss with stakeholders across the public and private system to better develop agri-digitalization. And this is something we'll be developing further under our CAP ACAS policy process. Looking at a framework approach, how we can engage with all partners, how digitalization can develop for productivity and sustainability, how we can encourage the use and uptake of digital technologies, how the generation of data from the system can look at new business models that help us to drive the activities that we want to achieve in 1, 2, and 3 here. And then how we deal with impact on society and the economy, and we do this in tandem. So from our perspective, and this is kind of my leaving comment for today, is if we have stakeholders who are looking at the development of agri-digitalization, they really need to think of it within a context of what are the key challenges facing the industry, either on the productivity or the sustainability side. And to think of it within this framework. It's not business as usual, it's where farming and agriculture and all our stakeholders and the processing industry need to go in the future. And this is the key challenge for us. So I'd like to just give you this frame for your considerations, and it'd be interesting to hear of the developments. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. That was really interesting. There's several queries coming in from participants regarding the slides and so just to let you know that afterwards we'll work with the speakers to make the slides available to you through the ASA website, TSSG and other social media platforms. And also the webinar is being recorded too, so we will make that available to you afterwards, because I know across the 3 presentations there will be lots of content. So Patrick, that was an excellent start and an overview to the session, not just this morning but to the session later on today also. So thank you very much for that. Just quickly before I pass over to Ethan, there's a lot of activity in this area and I know it's relatively new, but in terms of how we compare maybe with other countries across, the EU or the world, what would your impression be in terms of how Ireland is performing? Both in terms, we'll say, of funding into the area and we'll say maybe commercialisation of some of the initiatives that are underway.
So thanks, Karina. So I think there's 2 things to consider. One is the US situation and the EU situation. So on the US side, there has been over a long period of time very significant capital within that system and access to finance. And this system is now looking towards the food system itself. So there's quite a significant amount of commercial and private activity in the US, probably mainly suited to the type of farming that takes place there, either large scale cattle farming or big crop farming situations. Europe then, on the other hand, needs to develop agri-digitalization for its own context. And we know we have a different farming context all across Europe. And what the EU and nationally countries have done is very much take a bottom-up approach. So very much build the knowledge base, build the research and innovation activities. And on the other side, then we've slowly seen capital and access to finance being made available. And Ireland has probably been one of the leading countries in putting the access to finance and the knowledge base in place. And we can see that, one, with the investment by the NTMA and ISA with Finisterre, or EI, Enterprise Ireland, being involved with AIB and the Yield Lab, for example, or All-Tech and Dog Patch Laboratories. But then on the R&I side, we can see the very significant activity by, for example, Teagasc and TSSG and UCD in European Research and Innovation Awards. So we're right up there in terms of the knowledge base. We are right up there in terms of the access to finance. And I think then in the middle now is to try and grow the level of entrepreneurship and the piloting and demonstration of the innovation outputs of the research projects. And if we can carry on in this trajectory, we will be in a good place.
Excellent. Thanks, Patrick. Okay, our second speaker this morning is Ethan Cleary. Ethan is Ag-Tech Policy and Innovation Executive with the IFA, and he recently led an IFA report on digital agricultural technology, reflecting on how farmers view technologies, the barriers and to uptake, skills needed, and so on. So it's a really excellent report, Ethan, and we look forward to hearing a bit more about that through your presentation. So I'll pass over to you now.
Thanks, Karina. Let's just launch the presentation. Yeah, so hello everybody. I'm going to talk about the research that we carried out last year through IFA's training division, Farm Business SkillNet, which is backed and supported by SkillNet Ireland. We have a short time frame, so I'm going to discuss some of the kind of relevant findings and the consequences of the research. So a bit about myself. I'm in charge of digital product development for the IFA, which is building apps, websites and systems. But in the last couple of years, as we've seen the kind of increased focus on digitalization within agriculture, I kind of moved into more of a policy development role. And if you want to get full access to the report, it's available from ifa.ie/digital. And I'm sure we'll circulate the pitch deck after this as well. So, you know, as mentioned already by Karina and Patrick, you know, ag-tech and agri-tech is a broad term, and we have defined it as encompassing the likes of biotech, farm software, digital ag, robotics, etc. And there are some amazing things happening in those fields. You know, you just look at what ICBF is doing here with genomics and with the suckler farms across Ireland. But we decided to focus on the digital side of things, you know, how you convert analog offline processes into ones and zeros, and how that can be actually, you know, acted upon to bring value to the farm business. So we started off with this kind of lofty but essential kind of medium to long-term mission, where we want every farmer to have access to the skills and the technologies that's required in this digital era. So this is a wider kind of issue as well. It's a societal issue. Only 60% of Irish people, 6% don't have access to the basic skills. And what I mean by here is sending emails, downloading apps, and completing forms online. So it's, again, you have to kind of look in a wider context. What's causing this? Is it lack of access to, the critical infrastructure? Is it fear, motivation? The complexity of use around the technologies, and agriculture is no different. So, although we can kind of see this changing now, and a lot of people are saying, that the current pandemic is driving this, you could sense it before that as well, when you can see the consumerization of IT, delivering, simplifying technologies, better user experiences. We started seeing the last couple of years, and I suppose we wanted to get a sense what was going on now, because the last previous research was about 10 years ago, the Connolly and Woods report. So, we have to look at, how do we go about increasing productivity? We all know the figures. We have to feed, close to 10 billion people by 2050, and that translates into, total factor productivity of about 70%. So how do we go about kind of harnessing the kind of capabilities within the sector? What are the key things we can do to lever that and make it better, and actually kind of bring farmers along this journey so that we're all actually producing more and it works out better for society as a whole? So the actual research itself, we had a sample size of the survey around 770 participants. The survey itself was formed from our own kind of IFA commodity committees, which we kind of structured kind of group interviews around it. And then we talked to some people from the wider agri-industry as well to get different perspectives. In terms of the overall profile, it's largely in line with other research in the matter, such as the Chagas National Farm Survey, in terms of, the breakdown with beef, dairy, sheep, etc., and then the actual farm size breakdown as well. So the kind of the key takeaways. So this is kind of obvious, but, confidence in technology goes along with adoption. We can see that, back to the consumerization of IT, the majority of farmers have a smartphone and actually a laptop now. So the smartphone was kind of the great opener here into other form factors that allow maybe additional capabilities. 70% of those people of those farmers who have smartphones are using farming related apps. So that's farm records management, that's stuff like, geofencing, that's stuff like checking out agri-media, getting weather information. Unsurprisingly, younger farmers are more confident because they have probably been kind of exposed to that from an earlier age. So we have to look at how do you increase that confidence across the sector as a whole. There's trust networks, there's better access to education supports, information on where to go for training around this, and the physical infrastructure. So a lot of the stuff that Patrick kind of mentioned already. So current technology usage. Overall, there is a positive attitude towards technology, with 86% of farmers identifying that they're using technology or planning to use digital technology in the near future. But we sampled across a different group of technologies that are our commodity kind of focus groups kind of surface for us, and we only found 2 systems with over 75% adoption in a relevant sector: the calf registration system and GPS machine guidance within tillage. So what are the barriers that are stopping this? And look, there's no getting over it. Broadband is still a major issue. And it's not even like applications on the farm. It's when you come back in and have to sync data, or you want to sit down and actually, put your farm records in, or you want to find out information about what's going on. The cost of initial investment and support of maintenance, is pretty high up there as well. And maybe that's a legacy of the non-digital technology sector. Where people think that servicing is something that's required on an ongoing basis, as opposed to having firmware updated over the air. 60% included access, support, and training, their top 3 barriers. Again, from a farm business skill point of view, this is something that we've adopted into our roadmap for the next couple of years. So who or what influenced your decision to use farming technology? Agri-media, definitely number 1, and this is actually higher for under 35s, with 52% has picked that as the strongest influence. But the collaboration with the farm advisors is absolutely critical. The knowledge transfer groups, discussion group model, social relationships should be leveraged, and this is, in kind of secondary research, we see this as well with the likes of Innovation for Agriculture in the UK, where trust networks have been identified as the best for knowledge transfer within agri groups. How does technology help you in your daily work on the farm? This is very similar to digitally mature industries such as manufacturing or finance, where the main drivers has been the business value of IT. So anybody involved in the startup ecosystem, if you can convey like what the value proposition of your technology is, it saves time, it reduces labor, overheads, it reduces the time I have to spend doing stuff, but it also gives me greater access and information and intelligence into my operation. So education and training. So again, we can kind of see that building confidence is essential. So we see that knowledge transfer and discussion group models are taking precedence, even for those that will be considered digital natives who have no issue online learning. And in the current pandemic as well, we have seen a willingness for our members in IFA to adopt digital technology to facilitate training and social learning. So the capability is there, and again, it's just about how do you actually tap into the kind of vast resources that are out there around all of this stuff. So what support incentives, what would we encourage you to use and increase your use of digital? Financial incentives would be the most likely factor. And again, this includes demonstrating the kind of the cost benefit savings of technology. So if you're working in this, if you're working in the startup sector, how do you convey that? Are you building solutions that are closely aligned to what farmers are looking for? Aside from broadband, again, increased support and training would have one of the most positive effects in terms of driving to the increased use of digital technologies. Sharing data. Now, this is kind of interesting and probably warrants his own deep dive research. So 40% of our farmers said they'd be happy for their data to be kind of exchanged in an anonymized, aggregated fashion if it led to, you know, decreased cost of purchase or better value or better subscription models. So again, as Patrick mentioned previously, the governance side of this is critical, and that COPA COGECA, you know, EU Code of Conduct and agricultural data sharing is flexible enough, but also kind of it covers the governance that's required around protecting farmers in this type of scenario. So the key drivers, just to kind of finish, increase confidence, build the appreciation of the cost versus benefits of the technology. So farmers need to see this, and, you know, we can see that this education and implementation approach is, you know, happening hand in hand. A good example of this is Demeter, the Horizon 2020 program that I'm sure Kevin will talk about, where you have 20 pilots across 18 countries, the digital innovation hub model, where farmers get to see firsthand how the technology works and how it can make a difference to their operation. But underpinning all of this is the need for high quality broadband. So, you know, kind of the takeaway from this is, look, we're trying to help farmers at whatever level they are to be able to hop on the digital skills adoption curve and find a path through for them to actually get the most out of technology there, and to make sure we don't end up with like a two-speed economy where we have rural and urban left behind because of the lack of access or understanding of what's available out there. So again, the report is available there, ifa.ie digital, or you can contact me via email there, not a bother.
That's brilliant, Ethan. Thank you very much, and sticking to time as well. That's really good. It's 10:30, so in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to our third speaker, and then that will leave us some more time for the Q&A session. So please, if you have questions for either of the two speakers so far, send them in, and I will get to them then once we have finished with our third speaker. So I'm delighted now to welcome our final speaker, who is Kevin Doolin, and he is Director of Innovation at the Telecommunications Software and Systems Group, TSSG. So we've no shortage of acronyms in the session this morning. Kevin is extremely involved in Europe, and he will talk to us about European priorities in ag tech and how these are being addressed through projects at TSSG. He also sits on the Agri-Food 2030 committee. So Kevin, I'm going to pass over to you, and we're delighted to have you here this morning.
Hi, thanks for that, Karina. Hi, everybody. As Karina said, my name is Kevin Doolin. I'm the Director of Innovation in the Telecommunications Software and Systems Group. Just a very quick one on what TSSG is. We're an international research centre established in WIT in 1997. It's co-directed by myself and my colleague Sasitharan Balasubramaniam. We've over 90 staff, and we're 100% self-funded. So essentially, we're continuously writing calls for project proposals to secure funding. I suppose we're an organization that makes enabling technologies like communication systems, machine learning and AI, and so on, and we apply those then to different verticals, excuse me, such as Ag-Tech. You can see some of our numbers here. We've raised over 120 million since we were founded. We've over 21 PhDs graduated, over 150 peer-reviewed publications. But more importantly, we've a global network of over 700 partners and customers worldwide that we engage with. But to move on to the agriculture side, and I know Patrick has touched on this a little bit around the CAP. There are certain issues, though, with digitalization of the farming sector in rural areas that still need to be overcome, and this is why the European Commission, for example, is funding projects in that regard. Infrastructure and connectivity is a key issue. You know, these systems are only as smart as the amount of data we can push through them. That's why, you know, broadband and 5G and 6G are actually very critical. Farmers' awareness about benefits and skills, Ethan has touched on that already. Standardization and interoperability of systems is crucial as well, and I'll talk about that with regards to one of our projects in a minute. Also, data ownership and financing investments is there are other bottlenecks that are in the system. And there's potential risks there as well in terms of the digital divide, and we've seen it certainly in some of our larger projects that, you know, often larger scale farms and organizations have the resources and the funding to push a lot of high tech in place, whereas smaller farms may not, and that just increases the digital divide, which is not what we want to happen. And of course, this can create an impact on jobs as well, you know, as technology takes over. So we always need to take that into account, as well as the overall socioeconomic impact. But some of the key things related to the work we do is around digitalization of agriculture to support the digital single market, dealing with precision agriculture, looking at climate change, ecosystem degradation, and policy support. And just on the left here, I've shown just a couple of the names of the projects I'm going to talk about very quickly. Just lastly, in terms of the role of TSSG, we play multiple roles. Like nationally, we're part of the Foodwise 2030 strategy. We ran a panel on that recently in Dublin. We can be seen as an entry point for organizations wanting to access Horizon 2020, or Horizon Europe and Digital Europe, which are coming down the road. We have the Vista Milk Centre, and we've got PACE, which I know Hazel is going to talk about a little bit later. In terms of our European reach, we've represented Ireland in workshops around Germany and Ireland collaboration across Ag-Tech. I'm part of the working group for the AI and agriculture strategy and the digitalization of agri and rural economies strategy in the EU. We try and foster a lot of project collaboration, and we'll be having a webinar around that in June, so keep an eye on our social media. As I said before, we're always writing project proposals. So at the moment, Hazel and I and a few others are working on a proposal towards digitalization of rural economies. And this is everything rural except agriculture. Internationally as well, we've been I've gone to the Forbes Ag-Tech Summit in California, and just last Friday I was part of the EU-Brazil cooperation strategy webinar, where we're trying to bring, I suppose, the best-in-class research from Europe and Brazil together to start collaborating a little bit more. I'm going to talk very briefly about our projects. Demeter is the first one. It's a large-scale project that I'm coordinating in TSSG, and Ethan and Patrick mentioned this already. It's a 60-partner project involving 18 different countries. And essentially, it's about digitalization of the agri-tech supply chain from farm to fork. The problem it's trying to solve is that all these different ag-tech systems, more often than not, don't actually talk to each other. So while they all might perform their individual roles very well, the communication across the supply chain isn't there. And that's what Demeter is trying to solve at a data level, essentially. So we're going to build a platform, open source platform with a suite of technologies there, and then trial it in a number of pilots. 20 different pilots across Europe involving about 6,000 farmers. Importantly, we've got the World Farmers Organization involved there as a partner, and they're going to disseminate out to, they say, 1.5 billion people in the ag-tech community globally. Just very briefly to touch on some of the pilots, and you can get a lot of this information on the Demeter website. We're looking at water and energy management. We're looking at precision farming. We're looking at how to manage healthy and high quality crops. On the dairy side, we're looking at high quality milk production and animal health. And then we've kind of got a cross-sectoral full supply chain set of pilots as well. Another project that we're involved with is about modernization of the CAP, and it's a project called NEVA. And essentially, this is about digitalization of the Common Agricultural Policy itself. So it has 18 different payment agencies from across Europe coming together to look at different digital systems they can put in place to ease compliance with the CAP, essentially. Within that, TSSG is looking at data management across the different payment agencies. And also we're developing software to facilitate farmers to adhere to and report on their land parcel management. Smart Agri Hubs is another large-scale project, and I know Hazel's going to talk about it, so I'm going to skip over it. And AgriRobo Food is very similar. It's a collection of digital innovation hubs in the robotics space related to agriculture. And again, as there's open calls mentioned there, I'm going to let Hazel talk about that when she's doing her presentation a little bit later. I suppose the key takeaways between Smart Agri Hubs and AgriRobo Food, TSSG has our hands on about 14 million euro worth of open call funding that we can help companies to try and secure. So we know precision agriculture is happening. The issue is that another issue is that it requires a huge amount of computing power to fully realize its vision. And that's where high performance computing comes into play. The issue there, though, is that high performance computing facilities are broadly inaccessible at the moment. They're extremely expensive, and there's limited expertise in everything that you can do with HPC around big data and data mining, artificial intelligence, providing access to sensors and processing the data coming from those sensors. So funnily enough, we have a project, another large-scale project called Sabella, which is about making HPC systems more accessible and providing a faster time to market for different HPC solutions. And within that, we have focused on precision agriculture and precision livestock farming as well. So for example, pig weighing optimization. So you can get more details on Sabella on our project website as well. And I know Hazel's going to talk a little bit about open calls and cascade funding. So I just want to show you the type of project that you could get funded using cascade funds. So this is one that TSSG applied for through another European project called the Internet of Farm and Food 2020. And it's called MELD, and it's about early lameness detection through machine learning. So it's using sensor data to detect when an animal is about to become lame using data analytics. We're currently undergoing trials for this in Portugal, Israel, and South Africa, looking at around 2,000 cattle. Some of the earlier results of the project showed we could detect lameness in cattle about 3 days in advance of when you could notice it visually as a farmer. So it's a substantial result, and the project is ongoing. In terms of funding, it was like, I think it was about a 15-page proposal. It's very competitive, but a 15-page proposal for about €250,000 in funding. So it's an extremely good deal, these cascade funds that Hazel's going to talk to you about. And that's it. I'm 30 seconds short of the 10 minutes. That's my contact details if anyone wants to follow up.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That was really good. And while there's a lot of detail in the presentations, as we say, they will be available afterwards. And I think that it just might spark interest in some listeners in areas that they wouldn't have thought of before. So I'm going to ask the three panelists, so Kevin, Ethan, and Patrick, just to come back so that we can see you. And you know, we have about 15 minutes or so for a conversation and to maybe tease out some of the issues that we have spoken about or you have spoken about through your presentations. And again, for anybody listening, to send in whatever questions you have, and I'll do my best to get to all of those. Kevin, you were just, because you finished last, I'll pick on you first. In terms of the role that an organisation like TSSG can play in terms of taking the pain out, because sometimes, there's, as Patrick has said too, there's a lot of opportunity, European funding, a lot of activity in this space, but smaller companies in particular can often feel, a little bit frightened, I suppose, by European funding, bureaucracy, paperwork, and so on. Can you give us some sort of practicalities of what's involved in terms of the ask from smaller companies, we'll say in particular, that might want to get involved in some of these projects?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. I'm in the middle of a project proposal at the moment with 57 different partners going in about 2 weeks' time, and it can be quite stressful. And typically in TSSG, we don't recommend SMEs and let's say smaller scale industries to join a project like that as a coordinator, because the coordination task is quite a mammoth undertaking for any organization. So what we try and do is we'll select the target areas we're going after under the work programs for Horizon 2020, and then we'll go out and try and find companies in the region and across Europe that may be interested in joining us in one of those proposals. And once a company joins as a partner, their level of involvement could be as simple as, okay, you fill in your administrative details, your phone number and all that kind of stuff on the European Commission portal. But then maybe writing a page of a profile of yourself as a company and why you would want to be in that EU project. So, for example, the Demeter project proposal, at the end of the day, the whole proposal was about, I think, 750 pages long. But for an Irish entity wanting to participate, their input to that would have been a page.
Okay.
So that's why in terms of scale of work, that's why we take the pain out of it. And that's important for companies to know, because, with anything on the EU side, it is a bit of a lottery at the end of the day. So TSSG and a lot of other RPOs in Ireland have a strong track record of coordinating these proposals, and we just make it easier for organizations to participate. So that's in terms of the larger scale projects. But then in terms of things like cascade funding, which I know Hazel is going to talk about. Like we have a number of projects like Smart Agri Hubs, Agrobo Food and Demeter, for example, which have reserved a certain amount of budget to be given out to organizations as a cascade fund. So essentially as mini projects. So we can help companies, if they're interested in leveraging some of that funding and taking some of the technologies out of these projects, they can come and talk to us, and we can explain to them what the project is actually looking for, what are the requirements, and how to fill in the forms. We can never guarantee the funding, but we can certainly point people in the right direction.
Very good. Okay. A question has come in from James Staines and asking, so I suppose any of the panel that would like to answer this, any views on how farmers as a group can benefit from their ag data? And is there merit in them forming a farmers co-op to aggregate data and perhaps then licensing it out? So looking at the value of data that's been generated on farms. Who'd like to take that easy question first?
Yeah, so maybe I'll come in here. I think it's an interesting consideration that James puts forward. And I think what we have to find the balance here is between this generation of data, how farmers can find a business model that allows them to take up technology, and maybe also take into account that, the lifespan of the technology. Should every farmer own a piece of own a technology or license it out, or be able to just have it in a type of a model where they just use it as a service, and the owners of the technologies maybe take back that technology, update it, provide it back to the farmer. So your data could be some sort of trade versus the ability to use technology, but to be able to have it regularly updated, and that this isn't a cost to you. So some sort of outlook on where we try to limit what costs may be on the farmer. And I think we need to consider why we want to aggregate the data and why it could be useful to someone else. It could be useful in terms of veterinary medical companies. They might want to know how you're using their product on the farm, and how this may change your use practices, maybe in terms of fertilizers, maybe in terms of feed, where there could be some sort of movement of data that helps you benefit your practice and your income, and also has a bigger outlook on maybe what you may need to achieve in ag climatize. So I think not so much a rush to kind of try to aggregate the data and license it, but more how it can be traded maybe is an idea that I think could be worth.
There's another side to that as well, though. You can come at it from another angle as well, Patrick, that the more data that's shared from farms, the more intelligent the systems that support the farmers are going to become. So if more and more farmers and organizations feed their data into these systems, the systems can learn from what's going on across one farm to another and another, and start providing more like decision support and things like that to farmers based on best kind of practice. So there's not a financial benefit with that aspect, but there's certainly an advisory type benefit, I would say.
Very good. Okay, Ethan, just in terms of your report, you talked about access to support and training being critical. Where do you see the role of maybe ag education fitting into that? So, young farmers through ag college, universities, wherever they're getting, educated, into what you would have talked about in your report, an integrated approach to education. Maybe you might just give us some comments on how you feel that should work.
Yeah, so one of the findings we got was, farmers were open to the concept of a dedicated ag tech kind of provider or extension service, okay? But how can this be bundled into all stems or all steps of the education ladder? Because, we have to look at, how do we qualify stuff like recognition of prior learning, prior experience? How can this all be brought together in a way that it actually helps build up the motivation to get involved and to actually try and learn more and see how this technology works. So when we're talking about integrated, we're really talking about that no matter whether, how digitally capable you are, your digital experience, that where to go, that there's some place that you can go to start. And then there's a pathway the whole way through for you to actually kind of learn how to assess these technologies, not even understanding, what they are and, how they can be applied, but to be able to assess which technologies are the most appropriate for your localized situation, and then for your farm operation, maybe as a whole as well. So it's just trying to make it easier for, farmers and our members to understand, where do I go for what, and what's the pathway through for me then.
Okay, yeah, very good. There's some questions or queries coming in on actual examples, we'll say, maybe particularly for Kevin or Patrick, where there have been success stories with SMEs that have been involved in Horizon 2020 projects. Fair enough, some of these areas are quite new, but it helps sometimes in terms of encouraging companies to get involved, where they say, okay, there's a company I know, they invested time and resource in it and they have seen benefits. Do you have any examples, we'll say, where you would say that there was benefits to an Irish company through their involvement?
Do you want to take that, Patrick?
No, I'll let you start, Kevin, because
I'm not going to name individual companies because some of their work and involvement in projects. Well, first of all, engaging in Horizon 2020 projects, just purely from a financial point of view, it gives companies the ability to go down a research path that it may not be on their critical path, but they have funding. They could hire in people and researchers to actually develop their products in certain directions, and to engage with the best in Europe to trial those out in different kind of scenarios. I know within Demeter, for example, we're still at the early stages of the work. But we have, for example, farmers people that own vineyards deploying new types of sensor technologies for pest management around vineyards and around olive growing, olive fields, probably the wrong term as well. And they can, once they prove their technology within an EU project like this, they can take the further step then to commercialize it. And there's also, again, within Demeter, anyone that's involved there that develops a technology, we'll be putting that technology in front of hundreds of farmers for them to actually try out. And there's a huge benefit to that as well in terms of validating that the technology is doing what organizations want. Okay,
Patrick, any comments on that?
Yeah, so I think if we just look at the timelines, so agri-digitalization from the EU and national side has really been picking up since about 2016. And there were companies that have come through the system, Mukol, etc., and we know the success of Herdwatch and sort of ICBF activities, where there has been successful application of digitalization of information, and it's been presented to the farmers in clear and transparent and usable ways. But what we're going to probably see now over time is, say, through the Vista Milk project, the SFI Research Centre, where there was a big state investment and also a significant private sector investment of digitalization products coming through. And then we're also going to see through this cascade funding in Horizon 2020 that Kevin and his colleagues are involved in a lot more activity. So without naming names, what we're probably on is the cusp of real development and real emergence of companies. But of course, there's going to be, it's not going to be an easy path, I think. There's going to be companies competing in the same spaces, and there's going to be also probably companies sort of being collateral damage, and they just can't quite succeed through that entrepreneurial path to find a space and niche in the market that allows them to develop further. So what I would say is, I think we need to watch this space.
Okay, and just in relation to that, Patrick, you mentioned in your presentation, when I asked you about how Ireland performs internationally, and you said in terms of investment, research, funding, and so on, that we're right up there, but maybe more needs to be done in terms of entrepreneurship or the actual realization of some of that knowledge into, we'll say, tangible products or services and so on. How do we, as a country, what needs to be done to foster that or to help that along? What are the next steps, if you like, that need to take place, or, where is the investment needed to help that process?
Yeah, so thanks, Karina. I think that's a very useful question for us at the moment. And I think, you guys in Enterprise Ireland are the experts on this, but entrepreneurship is a multi-factor matter. And so obviously we need the innovators, and we need the entrepreneurship and the investment from the Irish system to bring along these high potential startups. We need access to finance that they can move through their different rounds of funding, and not probably give away too much of their IP, and that the company can survive. We need them to link into the likes of the Vista Milk projects or the Smart Agri Hub activities or the Demeter projects, to be able to leverage the expertise and to not work in a vacuum. We need to create a sort of an innovation ecosystem where companies and researchers and farmers on the ground are sparking off each other, and the tacit knowledge of what the farmer knows on the ground for his own farm needs to be applied with the technology provider and the researcher, and this needs to melt together to really scale and develop. And the access to finance funds and the entrepreneurship funding that comes from Enterprise Ireland will be fundamental in this as well.
Sorry, Kevin. Karina, can I come in?
Yes, please.
No, I'll just say that there's a program down at NUI Galway, the Ag Innovation Program, which is brilliant, because it's applying the disciplined entrepreneurship model from Bill Owlett in MIT, and it's focused exactly on this situation around how to develop the entrepreneurial skills and align it really closely with the actual farmer need. So before you do anything, you actually understand what the challenges are that farmers are facing, and then and only then do you start conceptualizing a solution. So I think that type of approach is definitely what's required, as opposed to building a technology or taking a technology and looking for a solution within agriculture. You actually teach the empathy that's needed at the start to understand what the job to be done is. So it's an excellent program, and I think it's a great step forward.
Very good. Kevin, any comment on that?
Sorry, I was just typing an answer to someone else's question there.
Yeah. Entrepreneurship. In terms of fostering entrepreneurship, how do we do that?
Yeah, there's multiple things we can do. And I know Hazel and the team at TSSG are doing great work through PACE in terms of outreach to organisations to tell them what's going on in the research space. But I think we're still missing, Ireland is still missing the trick a little bit in terms of just trying to bring in more Irish entities into, let's say, EU funding programs and so on. There isn't really one place where you can go to find out who in Ireland is targeting what, let's say, EU proposals. And I think it could be something, and I know Patrick and the guys in EI are doing their utmost to kind of push the message out across Ireland as well. But I think more interaction between the RPOs that are coordinating proposals, for example, the development advisors within Enterprise Ireland, would be very important, because we can have, again, we can help those companies join our project proposals and leverage the funding that comes out of them. So I think that some sort of even a national forum of kind of who's doing what in terms of writing proposals to try and secure ag-tech funding would be very important. And then through that, we can bring along, you know, new companies, startups, and so on as well. As long as you have a company registered on the Commission portal, you can participate in an EU project.
Okay, very good. A final sort of a broader question, because we're right up on 11, and I want to pass over to Seamus O'Mahony, our president of ASA, and also to introduce, Seamus might introduce our next chair, Dr. Aisling O'Neill from ARC Labs in Waterford. But the EU Farm to Fork strategy was released this week or last week. And, you know, many of the tools or the technologies, so Ethan, you talked about ag tech being broader than just digitalization. You know, there's a lot in that report about maybe reducing or removing some of the tools or technologies in the toolbox, if you like, that we currently have available to us. And yet there's an increased focus on ag tech in the sense of digitalization and so on that we've been talking about this morning. Is there a sort of a contradiction in that, or, you know, how do they work together? How does this all fit together, if you like, in you know, that new European strategy?
Well, you know, we have to be very careful, because, you know, the US and China are forging ahead. You know, they have access to these kind of advanced technologies. And if we are operating on a global scale, which is what we are, we have to try and harness any type, you know, the broad church of ag tech again, what's available to us to make sure that we can still compete. You know, we produce the highest quality, you know, output. You know, we produce the highest yielding crops across Europe in a lot of situations. So how can we maintain that productivity, you know, given the certain conditions that have been put forward in the Farm to Fork, you know? And I suppose this is kind of goes back to why we started looking at digitalization, because it was the one area that didn't seem to be causing controversy. So, you know, how do we focus on this type of technology in order to help us optimize how we produce food? And I think we have to keep focusing on that. And, you know, hopefully stuff that kind of happens around, you know, the genetic side of things, that we, you know, within that Farm to Fork, there is a capacity there. There's trials going on, and like that hasn't been shut off to us, you know. But yeah, it is. It's going to be very difficult. You know, we have to try and increase our productivity, and if we're kind of playing with one hand tied behind our backs, it's going to make it even worse. So again, we're focusing on what we kind of have control of, which is around the digital area.
Okay, very good. Kevin or Patrick, do you want to come in on that comment, or happy enough to leave it?
No, well, I think Europe is trying to develop its own identity in terms of food production systems and wider bioeconomy, and how it manages for natural capital, and how it is trying to produce a food system for the future. And by developing technologies and industries and farmers and the consumer and the citizen within this system, that we will be selling how to do this to the world. And by being the first mover to be able to work this out. And if you think of it, Ireland is one of, you know, there's not so many countries around the world that are developed countries and that agriculture is such a large part of its economy. And we, I suppose, have an opportunity to really develop the industry to become a leader of not only food and bio-based products all around the world, but also the services to deliver that. And that's a massive opportunity if you think about it, because in some form and in some shape, the US and China and the Asian economies will have to try and figure out how sustainability and productivity go hand in hand. And if we do it first, and Ireland is a super ecosystem to be able to do this, because end to end you can get to from a farmer to the head of the government in probably the least amount of steps of some of the most developed countries in the world. That's to be looked at as in a positive way.
Very good. Okay. Unfortunately, even though we've other questions and queries and comments that have come in, we're going to have to leave it at that. I'd like to thank Kevin, Patrick and Ethan for your time into the presentations and for your participation this morning. It was really excellent. We've had large numbers of people listening in, which is really great to see. And I think, Kevin, one of the ideas maybe coming from this is that maybe there could be a follow-up webinar where, you know, industry or those particularly interested in this area can hear from RPOs, maybe Enterprise Ireland as well, in terms of just learning a little bit more about what's happening in particular areas. And, you know, this kind of one-stop portal maybe that doesn't currently exist to help companies to get involved and to navigate this area a little bit more. So maybe that's something that we could...
I think Horizon Europe will be the place to start with that.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to pass back now to Seamus O'Mahony, our president, and also Seamus, then after maybe you might just introduce Aisling O'Neill or just allow Aisling to come in there in terms of introducing the next session. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karina, for facilitating an excellent session. I suppose this morning we've been presented with super content, and we've seen that Agri-Tech is revolutionising the farming world and helping us to make better decisions. And there are opportunities that exist in the market that sometimes pass us by because we don't understand how to engage. From what I've heard today, ASA can be a key stakeholder in linking the industry, and Agri-Tech can be a key enabler for our agri-food and science arena. I think there are three key trends that I picked up today. Consumers are increasingly demanding more transparency, and farmers will share data for the greater good. Regulatory limitations and mitigating environmental impact will be a key value proposition for most. And sustaining the family farm and wider food industry through value, costs or labour saving propositions will also be key. Agri-Tech is a broad field, and we've learned today that we need to build partnerships to progress, to create innovation ecosystems. So we needed to break it down to be simple, transparent, with easy to see results, optimize our supply chains, and ultimately recognize there are great opportunities out there. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Aisling O'Neill, who might outlay the next presentation. I'd like to give special thanks also to Hazel Williams and Deirdre O'Gorman from TSSG and our own Siobhan Walsh from Council, from WIT, for helping us pull together this webinar. And I suppose as a member-centric organisation without our natural home and networking, you know, we're delighted to have everybody participate today. And if you have any feedback, contact us through our social media or pick up the phone to Barbara and the office.